Thank you very much for staying with us right here on the AM show. As advertised, we have joining us in the studio Dr. Kobina Arthur Kennedy. Well, he's a political activist. He's a man of medicine, a medical doctor, and he's also a stalwart of the MPP. Doc, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
It's really good having you, and it's been, I think every other interaction we've had has been virtual. Today you are in the studio with us.
That is true. That is true. It's good to see the faces we see virtually for real.
Right. Let me just start from here. I will go straight to the bit about the tussle between the AG and all of that, but I just wanted to find out, you have lived what we are living vicariously in another part of the world. I don't know how long you have been in Ghana for the past few days, but what is your take now that you are in town? What do you see?
Well, I have a feeling of sadness because what is happening is not good for any of the players, and it's not good for the country. And I am saddened that the reaction of both sides is to go to party first rather than the country. I kind of miss a situation, or maybe more appropriately, yearn for a situation where we have principled nationalists on both sides who will look at this as how would this affect my country, not how would this affect my party. I mean, talking about living elsewhere. The reason why Richard Nixon resigned as president was because Republicans went to him and said, Mr. President, what you have done, we can't support it because we are Americans. So when these things happen, I think we need to look at it as Ghanaians.
Was he the one who experienced, was it the Watergate scandal or something?
Yes, the Watergate scandal, and he was the only president in American history to resign the presidency.
Yeah.
You know, so of course there have been other instances, but the key point in that, both from the judicial point of view and from political point of view, is that the Republicans said, no, we can't support this. And to the point, a Supreme Court, including some of his appointees, ruled 9-0 that he should surrender the Watergate tapes. You know, they were behaving as patriots. When I look at what we are confronting here, I feel an overwhelming absence of that kind of spirit. I have followed all the press conferences yesterday and all that, and it seems to me, if you sum it up, that the Attorney General met with an accused person in circumstances that were, to put it mildly, inappropriate. I am prepared to believe that it is possible that the first meeting, he might have been ambushed. You know, you go to a place looking to see Benjamin and somebody else shows up there. It is unfair to say you ought to have known that the other person will show up there. Having said that, once the other person showed up there and you recognize him as Attorney General, maybe some things ought to kick in, you know, about appropriateness, the law, Rule 54, all these kinds of things. And it would appear that maybe those things did not come to the fore as far as the Attorney General was concerned. There are allegations that he also had telephone conversations with this accused person.
We've seen WhatsApp messages.
Yes. But if all these things are true, it will be difficult to see how the Attorney General maintaining his position will be good for the administration of justice. But having said that, I think we owe him due process.
True.
Which means there ought to be an investigation. And that investigation should establish facts. Having said that, whenever I see these situations, apart from even the immediate situation, I look for lessons that we can all learn. Is it that maybe the ethical rules are not clear enough? How, for example, does the Supreme Court Justice in whose home this meeting took place come in? Did he know of the fact that this relative was going to come in? Are there sanctions? All those are issues that we must deal with. And it also, of course, goes to the reputation of this presidency. this is a man who had done significant work to advance our legal world, and he deserves credit for that. So it is ironic that under his government, we would see all the things that we are seeing. And honestly, whenever I see and think of the president, I feel sad. The reason I feel sad is that he seemed to me to be a person who meant very well. You know, I tell people and they are stunned. The president once told me, he says, I don't like the presidential system. And I said, why? He says, because it gives power, too much power to one person. He says in the prime ministerial system, you are only a first among equals. So your colleagues can rein you in when you get too dictatorial. That was very admirable, hearing that from him. And when you put that beside the person we are seeing as president now, it is very difficult for me to reconcile the two.
So you're saying that sometime gone by, was it while he was president or before he became
Before he became president.
He told you that he didn't like the presidential system, yes, the executive system, because it gave too much power to one person.
To one person.
And now are you surprised when he got that power, how he's used it?
I am stunned. You know, you would have expected that apart from everything else, you could rely on him to be a guardian of our constitutional principles. You know, respect for boundaries, you know, a sense of propriety, making sure that the nation doesn't get harmed, you know. And opportunity after opportunity, you get the impression that he just quite hasn't found it in him to do that. And it's sad watching that.
You said that we needed principled nationalists.
Yes.
And that this entire NDC MPP thing. But in that context, let me just sneak in this. Principled nationalists, then, I mean, I am stunned by some of the developments, because then you have a former director of the Ghana School of Law. You usually don't hear these people commenting on. Now coming to talk about the fact that the AG should resign. But even that's not what I want to look at. That this administration, under Akufo-Addo, a lawyer, is the most corrupt ever. How do you reconcile that with the principled nationalist stance before we go back to the AG bit?
Well, it is good for him to say that. And to be honest, I have had the same feeling sometimes, but it will seem that people who generally would have felt reluctant to comment on such things are coming out to comment on them. The unfortunate thing is that all this is happening in the context of an election year, you know, so it makes it hyper-polarized, and whenever you say X or Y, people are talking about how you don't support your side and you don't do this. But I think that people like him ought to keep speaking on, because this is the only country we've got. And I just want to see people, regardless of party, step forward and say, you know, this or that is wrong, you know, which is why I feel that in the interests of the nation, if the MPP has, the NDC has tips, it should be released so that independent people can verify that, yes, this is all the tip, this is what it contained, and these are the facts. Because this is not about an NDC position or an MPP position, it's about what is best for our country.
Have you heard, though, what has been released, that conversation, purported conversation between Richard Dakwa and the AG? Have you heard it?
I did. I listened.
What did you make of it?
Looked at the transcripts. It just doesn't seem good, you know. But having said that, which is why you want to hear the whole tip, is that sometimes there might be other parts of the tip that were not played that may be exculpatory. Right. You know, sometimes in the same tip we get contradictory things said, and that one side might exonerate the other side. So I want to see that, because I want to be sure that when we say the Attorney General should resign or the President has sacked him, then we are sure of the facts. Having said that, of course, there are situations where out of honor, somebody might say, I have become an issue or the issue, and that it is not good for the work we are all doing. So I don't want
it's taking away from the core issue.
Precisely. And of course, you notice that we haven't even talked about the issue, this importation of ambulances and all that. Yeah. So all this bears on whether after this the case can go on and the results can have credibility. And I heard your guest before
Abraham
I came
Amaliba.
on, yes,
Right.
about how whether this is good for the attorney. No. I am not interested in whether the accused people would think the judgment is fair. I am interested in whether ordinary Ghanaians walking in the streets can look at the judgment and say, yeah, he got a fair trial. That's what I'm looking for.
A few follow-up issues. There's also this, as you spoke about that, there's also this bit about an attempt being made by one of the parties to pay back 2 million euros. You know, it was a little over 2 million euros involved in this. And the person said, okay, let's... what the issue is in there is that the state would try to recover funds in the interest of the state because you have supposedly caused financial loss to the state. In this instance, there was a refusal to take that sum of money. And some legal brains have found that curious. That is why some are pointing to the fact that maybe there was intent to see people behind bars rather than even serve the purposes of the state, just because of what you said. What do you make of that?
It is a reasonable argument, but you can, of course, look at it two ways. Of course, one very valid thing is to say, okay, bring us the money and the financial loss has been recovered. But you know that...
Because, in fact, you could actually take the money and still apply punitive
that's
measures.
my point.
So why not take the money?
Yeah, so I think that they should have taken the money and said, yeah, still in the interest of justice, because you don't want a two-tier justice system in which some people can say, okay, I've paid the money, leave me alone, and other people will be prosecuted. So from that point of view, yes, you can say it is important for the reputation of our legal system to punish people if we think they've done something wrong, in addition to recovering the money.
All right. My final point on this bit, and then we'll move away to other matters. Some have called on the AG to resign. Some pretty prominent people have called on him to resign. When we just interacted with Bobby Banson, a lawyer, he said, yes, he should resign, but he doesn't expect him to do so. He also said, I mean, we've also come to the thought about setting up some group to investigate, whether commission or whatever it is, to investigate the matter. Do you expect the AG to resign? If not, do you think the president will bring to bear any such commission? And so far, with the president not having made any statement on this, are you disappointed? Those final bits and we move.
Yes, I'm disappointed. I wish the president has said something about this by now, but you know, though, that the president has a long-standing relation with the Attorney General. This is somebody he trained in his chamber, so I can understand that there is a lot of agonizing in
There's
the
a lot
presidency, at stake in the presidency about this. But having said that, if I was advising the Attorney General, I would advise him to resign. Having said that, if he doesn't do that and I was advising the president, I will advise the president to relieve him of his responsibilities in the interest of our justice system. Barring all those things, we need to establish facts. But in addition to establishing facts, we need to lay out guidelines for future conduct of people in high places like the Attorney General. I heard people talk about separating the Attorney General from the Minister of Justice, maybe conduct of Supreme Court judges, justices. All those are things that maybe we should look at in the end as benefits or lessons to be harvested from this.
And that's the thing. Oftentimes people will say that these things happen, but it's not the bad thing happening that is the issue. It's about what you learn.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, a lot of the time, we don't learn. It's like we're having a conversation this morning. Let me just digress briefly. There's another development plan within a period of what? How many years? We've had so many development plans. You've not effected the last two.
Yeah.
We are coming out with another plan. And people will ask you, Charlie, where are we going? We keep drawing up plans without implementing. It sounds kind of like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the worst examples of that is how when every government comes, since Rawlings, will go and borrow money for public housing. Then they will build up to 80%.
Yeah.
Then the new government will come and somehow, when they come, they will decide that they want to do new public housing ignore the 180% complete and go get money to start their own. And you look at it and you go, how can we keep doing this to ourselves? And then we keep doing it.
Let's get into the Strategic Mobilization Limited saga, SML. And I mean, there are so many issues to unpack, I don't even know where to start. SMEL being subsumed under West Blue. There had been proposals to the Public Procurement Authority 3 times rejected. Somehow then they were subsumed under West Blue. Then later West Blue was set aside and they became SML and took over. There have been questions about what exactly has been their work and whether they deserve the over 1 billion that has been paid to them. There's also the question about the NPA, the GRA, and what role they played in this, whether indeed SML was filling any gaps or putting any stops in there. Then there is the interesting bit, a period, and I can just get the slide, where no taxes were paid by SML and the GRA was in the know. And these are all questions that have been raised. Recently, the KPMG report was released. The NDC claims it was on the back of some insistence impressing upon the president to release it, else they will not cooperate in Parliament. But what do you make of the SML situation?
Terrible. First, a lot of laws were breached in no sole sourcing without approval from the Public Procurement Authority. Parliament didn't play the role it was supposed to play. So first, I want to commend Manasseh Azuri-Awuni for the work he did. It sounds like he does more anti-corruption work than a lot of our anti-corruption agencies combined, which is interesting. So I think that all those contracts that were awarded contrary to our laws, people cannot benefit from breaking the law. So we need to pull those things back. We need to go back and collect their taxes. And we need to find out those who were asleep at the wheel or those who looked the other way while all these things happened when they should have been doing their job, which should have prevented this from happening. I think basically it lays bare the fact that we honor a lot of our constitutional strictures in the breach. That even though these things are there on paper, when powerful people decide that they want to do something, they ignore them and blow past them. And that is a classic example of what we are witnessing.
Per what some have read, they feel this deal should have been shelved, that it should have been truncated. Are you of the same opinion?
Yes.
Because on the other hand, there's also the bit about local content. You've already said yes, but there's also the bit about local content, local entities doing something for the country, local businesses, so to speak. What do you make of it?
They should do it legally. You know, I am for local entities doing things for the government and Ghana and all that kind of, but they should do it legally. You know, we should be careful about certain bad precedents. You know, I always tell people, people in government doing bad things with good motives, you know, that Fiorella LaGuardia, considered the greatest mayor in New York history, wanted to do something, and he was cutting corners to help the poor. And one of his friends said, Mr. Mayor, good people in good times must not set bad examples for bad people, because your intentions may be honorable in doing what you're doing, but once you set the precedent, less honorable people will cite your example later and use it. You know, so I am always for let's do it the proper way. Yes, let's promote local people, let's encourage them, let's give them breaks. When they do it, let's commend them, but let's do it legally. That's why we have rules in our society.
So the deal should be annulled?
Yes, it should be.
All right. Speaking of the same point, local content and doing things legally, that takes me, you know where I'm going, the SNIT issue. Dr. Brian Champong, Agric Minister, and all of that. Recently interacting with the majority leader, Alexander Afenyo-Markin, he said that, look, let's decouple the situation. Let's take Brian Champong out of it. He's a local businessman. He's established himself in the hotels industry. He's a hotelier and all of that. And address SNIT and the core issues at hand. He has charged SNIT, we've not seen any reaction yet, to come clean, review everything there is. What is the state of these hotels? How much were they making? What went into awarding the contract to, buying a champion for a stake, 60% and all of that. But in that instance as well, what do you make of this bid? Because some are saying it is state capture.
I am ambivalent about that because both sides on the surface have valid points. If indeed the state-owned hotels or the SNIT-owned hotels are not doing well and they want to bring in private investors to shore them up, then whoever private investor is qualified and has a valid bid should be considered. Having said that though, this brings back echoes of the Donkome privatization of the PNDC-NDC era, in which state enterprises were sold at Donkome prices to the cronies of people in government. So whenever we see these things, obviously, it should make us sit up and wonder whether indeed these things are being done consistent with fairness and openness and transparency.
This also brings me to the point, some have said that on the back of these developments, we should put an end, legally, policy, to politically exposed people owning or having a stake in state properties or having that ability while they are in government to own, buy state property. I've been told of an infamous case of someone who was in government, or I don't want to, I'm being careful, and this person, the residence where this person was, the person purchased the residence. So when there was a new party coming into that office, it was a bit of a tussle because the new person was saying, but this is the residence of this person occupying this office. But the other person said, no, I have legally bought this. You know, those tussles.
I actually agree that people in government should not be purchasing state assets. You know, obviously for exactly the reasons that you cite, because even when it doesn't appear obvious, sometimes there is, or a lot of time, there is undue influence being exercised. You know, for example, people hearing of assets being sold because they have connections to government. You know, that in the US is what sometimes we call insider trading. You know, that you have information that the rest of the public doesn't have. And the more important reason is that it undermines public confidence in government. You know, it kind of fuels the perception of crony government. You know, that people are giving things to their cronies, people are using their position. So I think it will be good in the interest of public policy and public purposes for people in government not to be able to get these things. And actually, you know, though, that in US, for example, when you leave government, you have to stay for some years before you can even become a lobbyist, you know, because they think if you're going right from government to some of those positions, it means you're trading on the influence that you had in government. And they do that for basically the reasons we are discussing.
You know what else is interesting, especially because of where you're coming to us from? In other jurisdictions, the Japans, the US's, and others, politicians may come into politics with money. Their money is heavily scrutinized, part of which accounts for why Donald Trump is now facing some of the issues he's facing. But most of them may not necessarily be wealthy. If they get any wealth, it is post-serving. For example, American presidents usually, they would be more or less around the same benchmarks they had. But afterwards, speeches delivered here and all of that, 100,000 here. That is how they end up making some. Here, people make the money while in office, and that is the difference.
It's actually an interesting point you bring up because that situation has evolved quite a bit in the US. It used to be actually that presidents left office and they were not even paid after they left office. And apparently people found out that Harry Truman, who was president was broke. So they changed the law to say that people should have their salaries for the rest of their lives. And like you're saying, a lot of people come into office as presidents not rich, even though senators and others these days are more likely to be millionaires than otherwise, because to self-financing their campaign and all. But then once you leave office, it's not the secret connection, but it's the idea that they put you on boards, you make speeches, and people like to hear from you. So you make money from it, and you write books. So that's how they do it.
Well, as far as the SNIT issue is concerned, how did SNIT explain itself? It's not giving us the bare bones of the facts we want, but it says this move was meant to develop the hotels into world-class institutions to meet world-class standards, that it was also meant for capital injection and also to assist in hotel management. Those were the reasons given. But like I said, the majority leader says SNIT. In fact, if I may quote part of what he says, because I had that interaction with him, which was taken up by this paper. He says, SNIT must come out, and even not only this decision, it must look at all their investments that are failing and explain them to the public. I am sure that the TUC and other labor unions will understand if these things are explained and will take away Brian Champong as a person and understand that let's not look at the form, but at the substance. That's what he's been saying. But let's come back to your party, the MPP. Are you still a member of the MPP?
Yes.
You still are?
Yes.
Card-bearing member?
Yes.
Some people say, I know that when I mentioned the likes of Dr. Nyahonya Hutamaklo and you, people say, oh, they are not members of the party. So that is erroneous.
Well, though, when people say that, I always find it interesting that whenever you say things supportive of the party, remember once you asked me, they say, oh, it's personal, so what have you praised about? And I gave you a laundry list of them. The problem is that there are people who think our party should be a theocracy, not a democracy. So in a theocracy, when the Ayatollah says right, everybody says right. When they say left. So people like, Captain Nyahonya Hutamaklo, myself, and from Boateng, by the nature of our training, we call things as we see them, And actually, I think that every party should have people like me and from Boateng and others, because we need consciences. Good parties need consciences. People who would tell the party when it is going off the rails, because maybe if they had listened more to people like us, this election year will not be as challenging as it is.
What I just find interesting when I looked at the three of you, all of you have had some medical training.
That's correct.
That's the interesting.
They teach us something in med school about objectivity and standing your ground.
I see. So coming to your party, election 2024 is about 7 months away. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia and the MPP have not been able to get a running mate, or at least they've not announced a running mate. Some have said it's a tricky situation because of the context, the issues being discussed, and whom to choose. Many male names have been bandied about. The Education Minister, Dr. Educhu, the Energy Minister, Dr. Opoku Prempeh, and so many others. Then there's Natoshi, whose name has also come up. But what do you make of the fact that 7 months to an election, usually by this time, the MPP would have a candidate and a running mate. Your party doesn't have that. What do you see from where you sit?
In fairness, though, that is not unusual. I think Dr. Bawumia himself was chosen quite late, And generally...
You mean for the first attempt?
For the first time, So it is not unusual for this to go on for some time. But looking at the arguments, it is strange that the same people who thought that Alan, for example, from Ashanti, shouldn't be given any preference as the presidential candidate, now think an Ashanti should be given preference as a running mate. If Ashanti didn't deserve the presidency or somebody didn't deserve it because he was Ashanti, why would he deserve the running mate position based on the same principle? So having said that, all those who are being mentioned, which is why sometimes the choices are difficult, have pluses and minuses. There are people who like them, people who don't. And actually, interesting, when Nana first chose Dr. Bawumia, he told some of us that I don't want to determine succession. In other words, he said, when I'm going, I'll go with my running mate. If I pick any of those who were aspirants, I will be putting them in position as quote unquote my successor. But look where we are. So a lot of factors go.
Wait. So just to stay on that, you said two major things today. That did Nanado tell you this? The president, did he tell you this in confidence, privately, in public?
The first part one, he said it to me privately in a conversation, but
the first one where he said he doesn't like the executive system. He gives too much power
precisely. That was a private conversation. But this one, he told the aspirants. The first time we met,
that,
he said
that he would not.
He does not want to determine succession. So that was the reason why he wasn't keen on picking one of the fellow aspirants. The idea being that if you pick somebody who didn't have any grounding in the party or otherwise, then it means that you just going to go on with your running mate and leave the scene. So having said that, so things change.
So it means on these 2 points, the president, has he lived up to what he said?
Well, he hasn't lived up to what he said, but to be fair, I am very reluctant to say he was lying when he said that, because circumstances change. You might believe something today, and in 3 months' time, based on new information or circumstances, you might change your mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were being dishonest when you believed whatever you believed 3 months ago.
I see.
In the
coming back to
choice of the running mate, so all those people have their pluses and minuses. I think that you can make a case for a woman, but I have never liked tokenism. You don't put a woman on your ticket because she's a woman. You put her on, as Margaret Thatcher would say, for substance, that he is there because if the gender were different and the name was a male name, you could look at the same person and say they are good enough to do whatever it is.
Competence is competence.
Competence is competence.
From where you sit, though, do you have any person in mind that you think would make a fine choice?
All those people are fine people. But actually, if I was Dr. Bawumia, I wouldn't pick somebody associated with this government.
You wouldn't pick someone associated? In other words, someone in government?
Yes.
You wouldn't pick someone in government?
Yeah, I wouldn't pick someone in government. Because the party has had difficulty explaining some of its struggles. And this is not a very popular government. So if you are trying to tell the public that you're going to do things in a new way, picking a face or a person not associated with the government or not in government is part of the message of newness.
But some would contest that, the vice president himself, who is now flag bearer of the party, is in government.
That's my point. So if you pick someone who is also a minister, you are doubling down on the government. In other words, this is continuity. You have no doubt this is continuity. I think that given where we are as a campaign strategy looking at this, I think that a lot of Ghanaians don't want continuity. In other words, they don't want the MPP, even if it is re-elected, to do the same thing, which is why, of course, the vice president is talking about an aplanke versus a driver. In other words, he himself recognizes that telling people that there will be business as usual is not selling. So if business as usual is not selling, there may be someone who is not in government might help you more, in my view.
I see. Then comes, and you've already alluded to the Alan Kyerematen situation and Ashantis and everything in there. Do you feel that looking at where we are, an Alan Kyerematen and a Kennedy Japan within the party would have served the purpose better, whether as running mates or as candidates?
Yes. I think, and actually, I don't want to mention the name, but when a mutual friend of Dr. Bawumia and myself visited me in the U.S. about, say, a year, 18 months ago. You know, he asked me for advice on behalf of Dr. Bawumia about choice of running mate. And I told him, of course, I didn't know Alan would leave. I said if I was Dr. Bawumia and I won, I would pick Alan as my running mate.
You would pick Alan as your running mate if you were Dr. Bawumia?
Yes.
But don't you think Alan also, by his actions and inactions and reactions, had made it a bit tricky for such a choice to be made?
Well, that was before he left and all those kinds of things. You know, that was when he was in the party. That was
before
my view. Yeah, that was my view. Having said that, you know, I think certainly the party will be stronger with Alan in than Alan out. I mean, whoever disputes that is not serious. And having said that, actually, if you talk about somebody who, as running mate, will bring energy, actually, it will be Kennedy Japan because, one, he wasn't, quote unquote, a minister in the government, so he faced the outsider label, and he got a lot of energy on the streets when he was running. So from that point of view, he would be somebody that should be worthy of consideration. Of course, there are people who would tell you, as for example, John McCain told George W., I don't want to be running mate, you know. So once the person says that, then that's the end of it. But having said that, those are my views on picking a running mate.
Do you think then that it was an opportunity missed, that after the presidential primary had been held, and maybe there should have been a swift move to get Alan to stay and give him this role so that maybe that would have... And do you think he would have accepted it?
Well, you never know what somebody will do and what they will not do. But I would have pursued that role. If I was Dr. Bawumia, I would have pursued it vigorously with every resource at my disposal, because that would have been one thing certain to improve the chances of the MPP. Having said that, of course, Alan is out there, which means that he could take this election to a second round, and if it goes to a second round, he might have a say. So the MPP would have been better off having him in the fold than out of the fold.
Some of the surveys we have seen point to the NDC making quite a lot of inroads. The last time I hosted the chairman of the NDC, Johnson Esiedun Ketia, he made mention of the fact that even per their internal surveys and analysis, if elections had been held sometime last week, Thursday, they would secure nothing less than 52% of the vote. But that brings me to this point then. Alan is with the Alliance for Revolutionary Change. What do you think his chances are in election 2024, looking at the pattern of smaller parties or independent groupings in our elections, and the fact that, by and large, they've made no impact?
Well, talking about Alan, I actually think the historical analogies don't apply as much as we think, because Alan has better name recognition than a lot of the other people who have run as smaller parties and blah, blah, blah. So if he ran the right campaign, he could have more of an impact on 2024 than we are seeing now. It's quite a few months since he left, and I think that the movement has not moved as much as it should be moving. You know,
the movement hasn't moved as much as it should be moving.
And I also think that listening to Alan, it seems that he is too much of a member of the establishment to shake it. You know, and occasionally he seems to lapse into giving the speeches he would have given as MPP candidate. So the question is not, can he do it? The question is whether he has the inclination to do what he needs to do.
I see.
To make him relevant.
Are you saying we need a more radical Alan Kyerematen?
Yes.
We need a more radical Alan Kyerematen?
Yes. Because otherwise, what's the point of leaving the MPP?
Interesting point. Which then brings me to, there are just a few more points to address. The economy.
Yes.
Some businesses are leaving the country. The claim is that others are also coming in. Of course, you would want to retain and keep adding on. Inflation is where it is, hovering around 25%. We've hit around 54% at a point. It has come down. Unemployment has almost doubled. The rate of unemployment has almost doubled. When you look at the exchange rates, you're looking at the dollar-euro hovering around 16, the pound above 17, and all of these other metrics, cost of living and all that. What do you make of all of this vis-a-vis our IMF program, our IMF-sponsored program?
The truth of the matter is that the IMF will never save us. If it will save us, it will have saved us in each of the 16 or so times we went there. Fundamentally, nobody's plans written in Washington or wherever will save our country. Only Ghanaians can save Ghana. The foundational problem...
I like that. Only Ghanaians can save Ghana.
Absolutely. The foundational problem we have is that too many of us don't produce anything. You know, everybody is a trader. We need to produce things. We even import food, Eziban, despite having some of the best arable lands in all of the world. Africa as a whole is a tragedy. Africa, according to Tony Blair's Africa Commission report, so it's a few years old, we own 46% of the world's arable land. And at that time, the Africa Commission was telling us that we're going to be using, now it was 50 billion, and now people estimate that Africa spends about 75 billion US dollars a year importing food. We're not talking about cash crops, food that we eat. So if we are not even producing what we eat, we spend millions of dollars importing tomato and toothpicks and all that. We're not a serious country. We like...
So you have a large chunk of what the world needs in terms of arable land, yet you are not using that land, and you are importing
We are
food.
importing, you know. Then they will come and talk about, planting food,
for food and
whatever
jobs.
and all that. We like sloganeering, you know. We pick as ministers people who don't believe in work. You know, you need to roll up your sleeves. If you're a president, you're picking a cabinet, you need people to tell you, Mr. President, when you put me in this position in 18 months, this is what I will deliver in 2 years. And then in 2 years, you do a reshuffle and you weed out the people who failed and bring out other people. This government has just danced around and done sloganeering. One of the funniest things to Africans abroad is, what do they call, when Nanadu says that, we will go beyond aid and we depend on ourselves. Then the next week he's in Washington or wherever begging for handouts.
No, but Ghana beyond aid doesn't mean, even the USA borrows. It has trillions in debt.
So what does it mean? The reason why they can have trillions in debt is that their debt is in US dollars. Ours isn't, you know. So my point is that we need to stop thinking that depending on handouts will turn our country around. We need to actually produce things, you know, toothpick, food, you know, tomatoes. Now, why is it that we import more tomatoes from, say, Burkina Faso than we produce? Is their weather any more conducive to tomato production than
their weather is actually more arid than ours.
Yeah, so
less.
Why? So every time we keep the slogans, you know, we do this, we do that, and then on the ground, nothing happens. We just talk.
Two things I'm going to take away from your last submission. Only Ghanaians can save Ghana. And so I repeat, only Ghanaians can save Ghana. The words of Dr. Kobina Arthur Kennedy. Not that we've not known this. And Africa as a whole is a tragedy, like you said. You know, it's been said from some literature I read a long time ago, the Congo Basin alone could feed not just Africa, the entirety of the world in terms of production.
Yeah.
In Africa, it is, I agree with you, it's a tragedy. But what then would you make of the other side, the NDC, and their candidate who has chosen a woman, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman? and how they have fared so far in terms of campaigning and relevance. He also says, for example, that some of the things we've seen in the past ought to go. You know, for ministers and certain appointees, even DSTV was part of the perks being paid for. Free fuel, housing in some instances and all that. He says in a future NDC government, all of that will go. You don't come into those perks. What do you make of his choice of running mate and his campaign and these comments? That's how we are wrapping.
I think that his choice of running mate is reasonable. And in fairness, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman is a substantive person. You know, she knows the substance of policy. I heard people argue about whether maybe picking a running mate from the Volta region or Greater Accra will have made more sense. All those are reasonable, but Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman is a substantive choice. All the things that you say about him talking about the perks of ministers and all that are the reasons why a second Mahama presidency is intriguing. It's intriguing because he left office in disgrace after the last time about managing a bad government, corruption and all that. And he's an intelligent person. I always assume that he must have reflected on these experiences. And if he is the person I think he is, he would want to leave office this second time with a better record and a better reputation, which makes him a possible vehicle for transformation because he doesn't need to be re-elected or he is ineligible even for re-election. So one can say that all that, you know, glad handing of the NDC because he wants another nomination will be irrelevant. So he can do what he believes is right. From that point of view, if he saw another mandate that way, maybe it will be beneficial to the country. So far, his campaign has been pedestrian. But, you know...
His campaign has been pedestrian.
Yeah, it's been pedestrian. But to give him credit, though, the only idea that has penetrated to the ground this campaign cycle has been the 24-hour economy. Right. I mean, yeah, it's just a slogan, but on the streets, that is what people have, the great transformational plan. Nobody knows what it is. But 24-hour economy, you know, it has ended. Dr. Baumia's technology stuff, you know, nobody really, you know, as one person told me, you know, do we eat Ghana card, you know. So
do we eat Ghana card?
Yeah. So I think that Mr. Mahama, I think he's running a low-risk, careful campaign, and so far he's avoiding mistakes.
Just because you said this, I just want to find out, how about Dr. Baumia? Because he's also said that, look, he doesn't have the steering wheel. Give me the steering wheel. He's in the shadow of the president. Don't you think he too, if he were given the chance, could do something differently, different from what, I mean, as vice president?
That's actually a valid point. He could do something differently. I just think that Dr. Baumia, to his credit, was actually a pretty good candidate in the primaries. You know, yes, they put government machinery behind him and all that kind of thing, which was unfair to the others. But having said that, everybody I've spoken to gave him very good credit for if you give him a lead about somebody who could help, he will follow up, you know, if he had to go to people's house. So he ran a pretty good primary campaign. It means that outside the shadow or away from the shadow of this government, he might be a very, very good candidate and maybe a good president. But, you know, under the circumstances, he lives in the shadow of this government, and that makes it very difficult for him.
Dr. Arthur Kennedy, thank you so much for having breakfast with us. We are greatly pleased to have had you join us in the studio for the first time. What do you make, though, of our... You've never been in, I don't know whether you were in our old studio, but...
Yeah, I think I was in one of your old studios.
Right.
This is pretty fancy. And by the way, let me tell you something. I admire the work Joy FM does a lot. You know, I said it before, brave reporting on Galamsey, very good analysis. So keep it up. This is an organization that we can all as Ghanaians be proud of, and all those of you who work here, you should be very proud of the work you do here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the glowing tributes. Maybe I should add that in recent times, COO Kenansa has been adjudged CEO of the year again when it comes to media and radio. So we try. We're getting there bit by bit. Dr. Arthur Kennedy is a medical practitioner, he's a medical doctor, and a political activist. He joined us for breakfast today.